And so with that, I will turn it over to our brother Nathan, and he has entitled his talk, Sabbath.
We'll see if it works. Nope. We'll keep it like that then. Good morning, everyone. We're at the end of the year, and oftentimes at the end of the year, it's a time for New Year's resolutions. It's a time to look forward, to ask, what are we going to do this year? What are we going to accomplish? What are we going to work and strive for? But today, we're going to do the opposite. Today, we will rest. Today, we will not work. Today, we will Sabbath. Today, we're going to challenge our preconceived notions, or at least my preconceived notions, of what Sabbath was. Now, don't worry, I do promise we're not going to end up in an extreme place. There's lots of extremist views on Sabbath, from Sabbath is meaningless, has zero purpose, zero intention of any believer's life, to Sabbath means that I shouldn't leave my bedroom on Saturday, because anything other than that is work. There's extremes, we're not going to end up there. But I am really excited to share some new thoughts, at least new thoughts to me, from some recent studies on Sabbath. And what we're not going to do is jump right away to what Sabbath means for us today. Okay? That's putting the cart before the horse. First, before we talk about what we can do today with Sabbath, we have to dwell on what Sabbath means in its original intention and purpose. Because once we spend time understanding what did Sabbath mean to the biblical writers, then the lessons and applications for us really become quite apparent. It becomes almost obvious what we can do today if we understand the point of Sabbath in the Bible. So if I go back in time, let's say 6 months ago, before I started looking at any of this, and you had asked me, Nathan, tell me about Sabbath in the Bible. What do you know about it? Well, I knew it was important, especially in the Old Testament. I couldn't really tell you why it was important. Yes, it was on the seventh day of creation, God rested. I knew that. I knew the point was to not work and to rest. And I knew that in the New Testament, Jesus says that we did not need to legalistically follow the Sabbath and all the rules that had crept up throughout Judaism. But I really struggled with this concept of rest. What does rest mean? So here's something that, again, I struggled with. So pull out your phones, okay? Pull out your phones. I know you have them. If you have an iPhone, on that left-hand side, the yellow box, that's for you. Android is a purple in the middle. So go to your settings, okay? Pull out your phone. Go to your settings. I have an Apple, so I'm going to go through here. The little search button on the top, search screen time. All right. And then right underneath that on the Apple side, it says see all app and website activity. You scroll down a little bit and you can go this week, you can go back a week, and it will tell you how much time you spent on your phone. Yeah, that was a good reaction. Oh, I don't know how much time is on your phone, but I bet you're not happy with it. I bet there's more time that you spend on this than you would perhaps like. And when we think about rest, I mean, we have more leisure time right now than any other generation before us. It's not even close. So does Sabbath mean that we should just play on our phone more on Saturdays and Sundays? Does Sabbath mean that we should just sit on our couch and watch TV more? Does Sabbath mean that we should refuse to do any chores? Refuse to help out around the house? That doesn't feel right. The concept of rest has such negative connotations these days. It feels lazy to be resting. You feel a sense of guilt when you sit down and rest. We grow up in a worldview of a Protestant work ethic where it is good, it is godly to do work. And that's not untrue. And you think about the kingdom, this greater Sabbath rest to come. Is the kingdom going to be like this false view of retirement, what a teenager thinks retirement is, where you just sit around and do nothing? You know, you sit on clouds and you play songs all day long. Is that what the greater Sabbath rest is? That doesn't make any sense to me. That feels very, very wrong. So I understand why we don't need to keep the Sabbath in all its daily laws, as Jesus said. But does that mean we should just completely ignore it? That's what I've done my entire life. I've completely ignored Sabbath. It has had no anything in my life. It does not impact my life. And that doesn't feel right either. I mean, God rested after the seventh day. Does that mean that he was tired? Did that mean that he wanted to watch more TV? This makes no sense. Did he feel like the way we feel on Friday nights after a long week of work, a long week of school? Whew, I just need a break. That doesn't make sense to me. Now, this topic is quite important, all right? There's a couple different reasons why this topic of Sabbath matters. So in the biblical text, from Old Testament to New Testament, you name a character, and the Sabbath was important to them. Well, you name a Israelite character, maybe. This was central to the lives of every faithful man and woman that you read about. Every week, they kept the Sabbath. This is really crucial to the lives of the people that we read about. Also, in Genesis chapter 1 to 11, the beginning of the Bible, this is the preface, the introduction, what sets up the entire Bible, entire God's plan. So it's a chiasm. It's mirrored around a center point. Anyone know what that center point of Genesis 1 to 11 is? What is the center of the beginning of the Bible? It's actually in the middle of a genealogy. It's Genesis 5, verse 29. Now he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed." Noah, the Hebrew word nuah, means rest. So Lamech says, I'm going to have a kid, and I'm going to name that kid Rest. Why am I going to name him Rest? Because he will give us rest from our work. That is the center of the first 11 chapters of Genesis. That's the center. That's the most important. There's going to be rest from work. Okay. And then in the New Testament, in Hebrews, there's talk of a greater Sabbath rest, which points forward to the kingdom. So in the kingdom to come, we will be Sabbathing. We will be in a Sabbath. That's what we're going to be doing for eternity. So maybe it's best to figure out what that looks like today, because we're going to be doing it for quite some time. There's a quote from a rabbi, Abraham Heschel: "Unless one is able to learn to relish the taste of Sabbath, one cannot enjoy the taste of eternity to come." That's what we have to look forward to. So to start, let's look at the origin of Sabbath, which is the creation story in creation 1 and 2. Sorry, in Genesis 1 and 2. So the English word Sabbath, it's just a transliteration. The Hebrew word is Sabbat. We say Sabbath. It's the same, just a transliteration, and it means to rest. No surprise. We read Genesis 2, 1 to 3. Nick read that. But I want you to ask the question, what did God rest from? So in day 7, what was it that God rested from? So what does it say? Thus the heavens and earth were completed, and all their hosts. By the seventh day, God completed his work, which he had done. And he rested, that's our word Sabbat, Sabbath, on the seventh day from all his work, which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work, which God had created and made. So what did God rest from on the seventh day? Yeah, kind of the same thing. So the answer is work. What was the work? The creation. So he rested from his work. What was the work? The heavens and the earth, the creation. So yes, everyone wins. Now this is different. This is important. So he rested from his work, from creation. He did not rest from working, okay? He rested from a noun, not from a verb. So he's not saying, I've been working all day long, now I need to rest. What he's saying is, look what I've done over the past 6 days. Look at the work which I've created. I'm now going to cease. I'm going to rest. There's nothing more to do. It is completed. It is finished. There's this sense of wonder, of admiration. a sense of worship, a sense of recognizing the completeness, the shalom, the wholeness of creation, and the plan set forth in it. It's a small difference that's really important. And let me use two different analogies to kind of explain. So, scenario number one, all right? This scenario number one, this is Genesis 2. You're building a Lego set. Maybe over the holidays you did a big Lego set or a puzzle. You've been working, you're following the instructions, you're building it up. You coming to build a Lego set, Caleb? Hello. His work is complete. So you're building the Lego set, you've worked it, you finally put the last piece in place. And you step back and say, whew, it's done. I'm complete. I can rest now. That's scenario one. That's Genesis 2. That's what God's doing in a much bigger Lego set. Scenario 2. I've been working all week in a steel factory. I've been changing out dies. I've been pulling pallets around, moving the coils of steel here. I am exhausted. I have been working on my feet 40, 50, 60 hours this week. I need to sit down, put my legs up, and rest. I am wiped out. That is not Genesis 2. That's not the picture we see. You see that difference there, resting from a work versus from working. Okay, so that's Sabbath from God's perspective. That's how it starts. What about us? All throughout the Old Testament, God gives restrictions, things not to do on the Sabbath. What should you be doing on the Sabbath? What should you not be doing on the Sabbath? We're going to go through a bunch of verses. I'll have the verses on the screen, and I'll kind of summarize them, talking through them. We're going to go too quickly. I apologize, but it's good to see the survey because there's some really important themes and patterns that will come out. So first, Exodus 16:25. The commandment is, do not gather or glean manna on the Sabbath. 6 days manna falls, you gather it. 7th day, the Sabbath, do not gather manna. Don't get food for yourself. Exodus 23, as well as Leviticus 25. This is a 7th year. The thought is you sow your fields for 6 years. You do all your normal farming, your normal gardening. On that 7th year, you don't. You let it be. You rest. And guess what? Food's going to grow anyway. But you're not going to do your plowing. You're not going to do your sowing. You're not going to do your harvesting. So the 7th year, you rest and you eat the overcomings of it. Exodus 31, we are told to keep the Sabbath as a sign of God's rest during creation. That word keep is an important word. It's the same as in Genesis 2 when Adam and Eve were told to work and keep the garden. It was Abad and Shamar. And here we are told to Shamar the Sabbath. We keep the Sabbath. We do what Adam did in the Garden of Eden. That's what they were told to do in Exodus on the Sabbath. Okay? Exodus 34:21, you shall rest during plowing and harvesting. The saying that we have is make hay when the sun shines, right? That is it? Something like that. It's true. When the sun shines, you got to make your hay. You can't wait. When this harvest is coming in, you got to harvest now. You can't wait till the rain. God says no. On Sabbath, you rest. You don't plow, you don't harvest. Not on the Sabbath. Here's a weird one. Exodus 35:2-3. It's also Numbers 15. Don't make a fire and don't pick up sticks. This one puzzled me for a while, but you ask the question, why in Bible times did they pick up sticks? And there's a story of a widow who picked up sticks in the time of Elijah. Why was she picking up sticks, did she say? To make a fire, to make bread. So don't think about HVAC. Think about making a fire to make your bread. God says on the Sabbath, don't make a fire, don't make bread. Use the day before. Connects with manna and all that stuff. Jeremiah 17 and also Nehemiah 13, when it's market day. Basically, don't have your farmer's market on the Sabbath. So all the farmers in the fields around the city, don't bring in your produce into the city gates on the Sabbath. Okay? Don't come to the farmer's market with all your stuff on the Sabbath. Then also all the feasts, all the celebrations, no work on those days as well. What is the big theme here? All right? There's a big theme that keeps coming back, and it's food. It's agriculture. It's farming. It's gardening. all of these restrictions with Sabbath connect back to farming. That's interesting, isn't it? Why would that be? Well, let's go back to our center point in Genesis, to Noah, okay? Because this verse, Genesis 5:29, is really an important verse when it comes to Sabbath. And kind of a fun fact for your own fun study, every verse that talks about Sabbath in the Bible, basically, has a connection to Noah. All right, that's kind of a fun thing you can look at. Sabbath and Noah connected at the hip. But let's look at what this says. So Genesis 5:29. Now he called his name Noah, meaning rest, saying, "This one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands." That word toil, it's a unique word. It's only used 3 times in the Bible. It's used here. It's used in Genesis 3:16 and used in Genesis 3:17. It's only used here and when God cursed Adam and Eve. He said, there's going to be toil. You're going to work the ground with toil. With toil, you shall have children. That's the only times it's used. Let's go on. The toil from our hands arising from the ground. What's that word for ground in Hebrew? Adam. Yes, arising from the Adamah, from the Adam. Cursed is the ground because of you. The Adamah, the Adam because of you. More Genesis 3 stuff ringing. Which the Lord has cursed. Yet another callback to Genesis 3. So there's a difference. Genesis 1, Genesis 2, God is resting from the work, the beautiful creation that he's made. It's complete. The Lego set is finished. But here in Genesis 5, it's a different picture. What Lamech is saying about his son Noah is there's a lot of toil. There's curses. It's really, really hard to garden. But you, Noah, you will give us rest from this toil. There's a difference. Now open up to Genesis 3. And let's read this curse in Genesis 3. So Genesis 3, this is after Adam and Eve take the fruit. Starting at verse 17. Then to Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread." Hey, there's that bread connection again. "Till you return to the ground. Because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return." The curse is that we will be enslaved to the ground. We will be slaves to sin, in bondage to weeding and plowing and tilling. Growing in food would require enormous work, phenomenal toil. And so now we've come to our center point. So here's my big point of everything, all right? The main takeaway, the main thesis, the main argument, what I believe Sabbath in the Bible is trying to tell us. Sabbath was created on day 7. God created his work of creation. It was good. In the Garden of Eden, the humans lived in a Sabbath period. They ate whatever fruit was growing. Their job was to work and keep the garden. All was good. It was fine. Then, Genesis 3, sin enters the world, and humanity was cursed to toil over the ground. It's not going to be so easy to reap from the garden, to eat the fruit that comes up. It's not that easy to eat anymore. Now, the ground is cursed. Sin has gotten in between us and God. Therefore, Sabbath is all about returning to day 7, all about going back to Genesis 1 and 2, before the curse. It's about celebrating the time when we were not enslaved to the ground, when we weren't slaves to sin. That's why all those restrictions, what not to do on Sabbath, it's all about food gathering and preparation. Because before the Genesis 3 curse, it wasn't work, it wasn't toil. That was part of Sabbath. Sabbath remembers before you had to work and toil against the curse. Manna had to be laboriously gathered for 6 days. But one day, every week, Israel was told, remember before this curse. Remember when you could eat whatever fruit you wanted in the beautiful Garden of Eden. Food would be provided. The manna wouldn't spoil. The 7th year would yield its crops. And so, Sabbath is all about breaking free of the curse of sin. And that's where we can see how Jesus enters the picture. Because ultimately, Sabbath is a rest from the Genesis 3 curse. It's a rest from sin. We can live in the kingdom, both now and in the future, because Jesus has freed us from sin. He hasn't just freed us from farming, from the ground, but from the serpent itself, biting our heels, from sin itself. And when Jesus declares, "Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest," he's saying, Sabbath is fulfilled in me. I, Jesus, have freed you from the curse of Adam's sin. I can bring you back to the Garden of Eden, where there's rest, where the fullness of God's creation, his plan of salvation, is fulfilled in Jesus. So how does Jesus teach this throughout his ministry? He uses examples. He talks about David, who eats forbidden food. Okay, back to our garden theme. He eats bread. Why was this allowed, Jesus says? Because the Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. What else did Jesus say? In Luke 13, Jesus heals a woman on the Sabbath who was bent over. The woman was crippled. You get this image of a worker bound to the ground, right? If you've been picking weeds your whole life, you're bent over double. That's who Jesus heals on the Sabbath and allows her to stand upright. I'm no longer bound to weeding and toiling. I have been freed and can stand up because of Jesus. And then ultimately on the cross, Jesus proclaims, "It is finished." He says, the work is done. The work of the ministry is over. I faced sin and I defeated it. Now I can rest. It is finished. It's time for Sabbath. John 4:34, Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work." We're going to take one step back and come at it at a different angle before wrapping things up. Thinking about this thought of freedom from captivity, Jesus providing rest, I want you to think about what this story of Sabbath meant to the Israelites who first heard it. So if you're an ancient Israelite, you've been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, and you're hearing Genesis 1 and 2 for the very first time. For the last 400 years in Egypt, there's only one thing that mattered. There's only one thing that everyone cared about for you, only one thing that mattered. That one thing was, how many bricks did you make today? That's all people cared about for you. Did you make enough bricks? If you made a lot of bricks, fantastic. I'm going to help your children because guess what? They'll grow up and they'll make lots of bricks too. If you didn't make enough bricks, how do you think that the Israelites were treated? Oh, it's okay, right? You'll do better next time. That's hard to imagine. If you didn't make enough bricks, your life is in jeopardy. Your family's lives are in jeopardy. The only thing that mattered to an ancient Israelite when they were enslaved, how many bricks did you make? Sadly, this isn't just ancient Israel. Just 200 years ago in this country, the only question that mattered to some people, how much cotton did you pick? Disgusting, isn't it? Or what about today? How often do we think, what really matters for me? How many sales did I make? What was my test score? How many goals did I score? How big was my raise? How much work did I do? So God speaks to these people who for 400 years, the only thing that mattered was, how many bricks did you make? And he says, have rest. What a phenomenal concept. You are freed from your work. God says, I love you no matter how much work you do. Your value to me is not derived from how many bricks you make, from how much work you perform. And this is powerful, both to ancient Israel and even to our society today, to give us peace. Because the amazing thing is that Sabbath became a legalistic nightmare. It was all about keeping super specific laws, doing all the work properly. But that's the opposite of Sabbath. Sabbath points us to grace, because we rest after we finish our work. That's what God did. God made creation and he rested. So us too, when our work is complete, we rest. What is our work? To break free of the Genesis 3 curse, to stop being enslaved from sin. Once you stop sinning, your work is complete and you can have Sabbath. Guess what? we can't do it. We cannot break free from the curse of sin ourselves. We cannot do it. The only way to break free from being slaves to sin is to turn to Jesus and say, I can't do it. I cannot do my work. I can't make enough bricks. I can't free myself from sin. But you can. And you did. Take my burdens. I'm done. I can't do it anymore. You completed the work, not me. When we say this, that's when we can have Sabbath rest. The only way to enter into Sabbath is by not working. You can't work your way into Sabbath. You can't work your way into salvation. Only once you rest can you enter Sabbath. And through Sabbath, God teaches us that we cannot earn our own salvation. So what does this mean for us today? Well, understanding this deeper implication of Sabbath, this purpose of it, really has profound personal implications for us. We haven't really scratched the surface at all on why God had this happen every week, the pattern behind it, but I do believe we can work towards the spirit of the law in keeping Sabbath. Sabbath is a celebration that at the end of the week, the work is finished. We can rest, we can look ahead to the greater Sabbath rest that will be granted to all those who believe in the kingdom. And so the question for your life, for my life, is how are you afflicted currently and today by the Genesis 3 curse? How do you have to toil and sweat for your food? It probably isn't literally food. Maybe it is. But once you identify how the curse to Adam impacts you, then we can take a day and celebrate how Christ sets us free from this. So in our family, our little family of 6, what we started doing was having a family Sabbath on Sunday nights. We read the Bible, we pray, we sing some songs, and our goal is to treat each other like it's a kingdom. It's a little slice of Garden of Eden on our Sunday nights. That's what we started doing. We celebrate God. We work and keep the symbolic Garden of Eden that God has given to us. And we reflect on Jesus. Jesus is the one who gives us rest. He is the one who delivers us from our toil, from our bondage to sin, and allows us to join with God in saying, it is done. It is finished. The work is completed. And now we Sabbath. Now we rest, freed from sin, and we can dwell with God.